guys all familiar with what a bucket list is? I don't know if anyone has a bucket list, but a bucket list is just a list of things that you really want to do or experience before you can't do it or experience it anymore. So people will have very adventurous or crazy things, whether that's going skydiving or going to visit Paris or having a meal with the Pope, whatever it is. My assumption is that most of us know what a bucket list is, but does anyone know what an anti-bucket list is? So it's really this made-up thing, but I learned about it this week. An anti-bucket list is a list of things that you've done that you hope you never do again. Okay, and I imagine your heads are already starting to spin of what you might add to your own anti-bucket list, but it's just things that you've done that you hope you never do again. And when I learned about this, I did a quick Google search to see what was out there, and I found some pretty funny ones that I wanted to share. The first is, one person said that they'll never squirt ketchup directly on their hot dog again without shaking the bottle prior to the squirting. Some of my guys over there are like, oh yeah, don't do that. Another person said they'll never buy off-brand Oreos again. Someone said they'll never test the expired milk again. Someone said they'll never drink 2 Monster energy drinks back to back, which I feel probably happens every year at Move. Someone else said that they'll never go camping again. Here were 2 of my favorites. One person said they'll never visit Disneyland or Disney World again because they paid way too much money to stand in way too many lines and fight crowds of way too many people. And then my personal favorite was someone said that they'll never go bungee jumping again because as soon as my feet left the edge, all I could think was, well, that was stupid. I'm sure we can probably all think of several things that we might add to our own anti-bucket list, but it brings up an interesting question of, what do I wish I knew back then? What do I wish I had the knowledge of before I did something? I have a handful of friends and family members that are getting ready to go in this new season of college, and as I just finished college, I'm very eager to just share with them all the things that I learned over my past 4 years, things that I wish I would have known as I walked into campus as a freshman. But the reality for life is that oftentimes we don't learn something until we experience it. We don't really know or understand something until we walk through it and experience it for ourselves. Sometimes we have to learn things the hard way because it can be hard to really believe something or trust something if we haven't experienced it ourselves. But what if there was a way to gain the kind of wisdom and knowledge that only comes through experience without ever living through a certain season of life? What if we didn't always have to learn things the hard way? In other words, what if someone was willing to take the test for us and then give us the answers? Unfortunately, I don't have all the answers for you, but I think tonight as we continue our Summer King series, we're looking at King Solomon, and I think he has some really great practical wisdom and advice for all of us. So King Solomon, he's David's son, who we talked about a few weeks ago. He's the 3rd king of Israel, and like I said, from his story, I think we can learn a lot, especially about what it looks like to get the most out of life. Because all of us want to get the most out of life, right? We want to have fun, we want to enjoy it, we want to be content, we want to have fulfillment, we want to live with a purpose. We all want to get the most out of life, but I think the struggle sometimes is, how do we do that? How do we get to that point? What do we need to do to get the most out of life? We know the end result, we know the destination that we want to get, but sometimes we don't always know the road to take to get there. And so what I want to do is dive right into King Solomon's story and see what kind of direction he might have for us. And the first thing that I want us to see from his story is that Solomon is blessed by God. So we're going to pick up in 1 Kings chapter 3, and at this point in history, Solomon has officially taken over as king of Israel. So David has officially given him kingship over Israel, and the first thing that we learn after this comes in chapter 3. God appears to Solomon, and he asks him this question: what do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you. Anybody in here wish that God would just appear to you and be like, hey, what do you want? I'll give you whatever you want. Just let me know. This is what happens for Solomon, and I think there's a couple reasons why God chooses to do this. One, I think that God really wants to help Solomon out in this moment. Solomon's a young guy, and he's taking over as king of Israel, which is God's chosen people, and God realizes this is not some easy task, and so I think God wants to help Solomon out, but also I think God wants to test Solomon and see where his heart is. Right? He's in this new season, new chapter, and he's asking Solomon, what do you really want from this? Where's your heart at? What do you want? And here's Solomon's answer, starting in verse 7. It says, Now, O Lord my God, you have made me king instead of my father David, but I am like a little child who doesn't know his way around. And here I am in the midst of your own chosen people, a nation so great and numerous they cannot be counted. And here's his request. He says, give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours? So here, I don't think that Solomon really could have had a better answer. Right? In this moment, God asks him what he wants, and he humbles himself. He recognizes that the task at hand is far greater than what he can do on his own, and so he asks God for help. Solomon specifically asks for an understanding heart and wisdom. Both are things that he needs to lead God's people well. And this answer, it pleases God, and it pleases God because his request shows that his heart was in the right place. Solomon's main desire at this point is to honor God by honoring God's people. He wants to lead the people of Israel well. He wants to honor God by doing this. And because this pleases God, God decides to give him a little bit more than what he asked for. All right, Solomon asked for wisdom and an understanding heart, but because God's a good God, he gives them those things. So he gets the wisdom and understanding heart, but God also blesses Solomon by giving him riches and fame. But the catch here is that God tells Solomon that he has to continue to obey him in order to keep these blessings. As long as he did this, as long as Solomon obeyed God, then he would continue to be, the scripture says, incomparable to any other king that's ever lived as far as his wisdom and riches and fame go. He would just be on a completely different level in the history of all the kings as long as he continued to obey God. And so from this part of the story, what I want us to see is that Solomon was blessed by God in some major ways, but the key to all of this happening and the key to all of this staying is that Solomon's heart was in the right place. He wanted to honor God. He wanted to be a faithful servant of God in this new position that he was walking in. But as we continue in Solomon's story, the next thing that I want to talk about is that Solomon's heart turns from God. So we were just in 1 Kings chapter 3, and now we're going to fast forward to 1 Kings chapter 11. And in between these 8 chapters, there's a lot that goes on. Solomon, he helps rebuild the temple, which is a big deal. He gains a lot more wealth, more and more riches. He builds a palace that takes 13 years to build from start to finish. He becomes more famous. He gains peace with all of the surrounding nations. It seems like he's crushing it, right? He's doing a really good job. He's doing what he's supposed to do. But as we get to chapter 11, we see that there's more to the story. Verses 1 through 4 reads like this. It says, "Now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord." And the part that I want us to pay attention to is that it says Solomon insisted. He insisted. He knew what was wrong. He knew that he wasn't supposed to do this, but he insisted on doing it anyways. He knew he wasn't supposed to marry these women. God told him not to and even warned him why not to, but Solomon insisted on doing it. This was a man that 8 chapters ago wanted nothing more than to honor God. God says, "What do you want?" He goes, I want to lead your people well. That's what I want. I want to honor you. And now he's marrying all these women and doing exactly what God tells him not to do. But it gets even worse because we're not going to read it, but the next several verses, it talks about how Solomon not only just disobeys God in this, but he starts worshiping these other gods. He starts making sacrifices and shrines for these other gods. So exactly what God warned him of, that his heart would turn from him, is exactly what happened. To make it worse, remember, Solomon is the king of Israel, so he's a public figure, and he's worshiping pagan gods. He's making sacrifices and shrines to these pagan gods in public for everyone to see as he's leading God's chosen people. He's not in a very good place right now. And we get down to verses 9 and 10. It says, "The Lord was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who appeared to him twice. He had warned Solomon specifically about worshiping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command." So God's obviously not happy with Solomon, right? His heart had completely turned away from him. Because at the beginning of the reign, the beginning of Solomon's reign as king, it seemed like Solomon's heart was perfectly aligned with God and he was eager to pursue what God had for him. But now his heart and his life had completely taken a 180. And the truth here that we have to recognize is that Solomon slowly allowed the things of the world, his wealth, pleasure, satisfaction, success, he let all of these things take rule over his life. Solomon started pursuing everything that the world had to offer instead of pursuing the one who created the world. He stopped chasing after God's heart, and instead, he made it his goal to gain the world. So my question for us is, what are you chasing after? What is the thing in your life that you want more than anything else? What is the deepest desire of your heart? What are you chasing after? Because Solomon, he got to the point in his life where all he really cared about was getting more of what the world had to offer. He wanted more wealth, he wanted more riches, he wanted more fame, he wanted all of it. And God, he clearly recognizes this and he decides to strip Solomon of everything that he had. He ends up giving the kingdom to one of his servants. Solomon, throughout his reign, he pretty much had everything that he could have ever wanted. But God took it away from him. And it's interesting because it seemed like Solomon had success and found favor with God. Right? God asks him what he wants, he tells him what he wants, God gives it to him. And now it seems like he's killing it as king, right? He's famous, he's gaining more wealth, he has peace with all the surrounding nations. It seems like he's doing exactly what he's supposed to do. But the reality was that Solomon gained almost everything he had through disobedience to God. One scholar said that in order for Solomon to achieve his goals of riches, fame, and peace, he broke almost every law that God had in place for kings. Solomon's heart wasn't focused on pursuing God at all. He was only focused on gaining more of the world for himself. He was focused on leveraging his position as king to get whatever he wanted. But what I think is really cool about Solomon's story is that at the end of his life, he basically gets to this point where he writes his own anti-bucket list. Okay, towards the end of his life, he sits down, he reflects on his life, and he's like, hey, I did this, and I would really urge you not to do this. This is what I did. This is the path that I went down, and I would tell you not to go down this path. Don't follow in my footsteps. So this brings us to our third point, and it's that Solomon realizes what really matters. So again, we're going to fast forward now to the end of Solomon's life. And like I said, this is a point in his life where he's looking back, he's reflecting on everything that he's done and everything that he's earned over his life. And he writes this book called Ecclesiastes. It's an interesting book if you've never read it, but it's loaded with wisdom and practical advice for us. And I want to look at chapter 2. So Zach, you can put those verses on, but at this point, Solomon, he's explaining that he was on this pursuit to find meaning and purpose in life, and now he reflects back to all these different areas that he searched for this meaning in. He said, come on, let's try pleasure. Let's look for the good things in life, but I found that this too was meaningless. So I said, laughter is silly. What good does it do to seek pleasure? After much thought, I decided to cheer myself with wine, and while still seeking wisdom, I clutched at foolishness. In this way, I tried to experience the only happiness that most people could find during their brief life in this world. And then here, he basically explains everything that he bought. He says, I tried to find meaning by building huge homes for myself, by planting beautiful vineyards, by making gardens and parks and buying reservoirs. And I bought slaves, and he owned large herds of flocks, and he was greater than any king who had ever lived in Jerusalem. He had all the money, the treasures. He hired wonderful singers, both men and women, and had many beautiful concubines. And he finishes by saying, I had everything that a man could desire. Anything he wanted, he had. Anything that money could buy, he had. Anything he wanted to experience, he did. He denied himself no pleasure. He had it all. He does whatever he wants, and he got whatever he wanted, but he concludes that this was meaningless. He didn't find fulfillment or joy in giving himself everything he wanted, but instead he found out the hard way that doing whatever you want and giving yourself whatever you want is a very quick road towards being empty and bitter. Because we weren't created to be pleased or content by the things of the world, but we were created to be pleased and content through a relationship with our Creator. Verses 4 and 8, what we just read, it basically said that he had a ton of wealth and he bought whatever he wanted. He thought that his possessions would bring him the contentment and joy and fulfillment that he wanted. He literally had everything he could have wanted in this moment. But the truth at the end, looking back, that he found was that it wasn't enough. Buying more and more, having more and more, being the richest person to ever live, it wasn't enough. It left him empty and wanting more. Because the problem with wealth that he discovered is that more is never enough. Once we get more, we're just going to want even more. It'll never leave us fully satisfied, but it'll always leave us discontent and wanting more. And again, this is the conclusion that Solomon's making. And I think it's interesting because, like I said, Solomon was the richest person to ever live. So I did some research, and the second richest person to ever live had a net worth of $663.4 billion. $663.4 billion. I can't even wrap my head around how much money that is. Solomon was the richest person to ever live, and his estimated net worth is $2.1 trillion. Round the second place up to $700 billion, that's an insane amount of money, but $700 billion and $2.1 trillion really doesn't even compare. Like they're not even close. Solomon was by far the richest person that had ever lived, and he's the one that's saying his wealth and his riches couldn't bring him what he truly wanted. And so Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, it kind of gives us a quick recap. He says, "So I became greater than all who had lived in Jerusalem before me, and my wisdom never failed me. Anything I wanted, I would take. I denied myself no pleasure. I even found great pleasure in hard work, a reward for all my labors." Solomon had literally conquered the world. He's the wisest, the richest, the most famous king that had ever lived. And if these two verses were the only things that we ever knew about Solomon, we would think, man, that dude did it. He did it. He conquered the world. He did what everyone wants to do. But the very next sentence, he says, "But as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile at all." So the question is, why was it meaningless? How can someone that literally has everything get to the point where he says that he was empty and it was all worth nothing to him? All right, he's at the end of his life. He's looking back at everything he did and he's saying, wow, I really missed the mark here. I messed up. I thought I would find joy and fulfillment and contentment by pursuing these things, but in reality, I found the exact opposite. So Solomon's story is kind of like those moments in life when you lose something really valuable or important. I don't know if your mom is like this. I love my mom, but she loses almost everything. Okay, so whether it's her phone, her keys, her wallet, like she's always losing it. And growing up, we were constantly helping her find it. So we'd have to stop what we were doing, or when we were getting in the car, we'd have to go back in the house and find her phone. So over time, we got pretty good at helping her look for it. And what we'd do is we'd split up into different teams, and we'd each take a section of the house, right? I would take the couch, my mom would take the laundry room, my brother would take the kitchen, and we'd all search for it. And when we were done, we'd come back, and you know what never happened when we came back? I'd be like, hey, Mom, I searched the couch, I picked up the cushions, I looked under it, I looked behind it. Your phone's not in the couch. It's not there. Never once when I said that did my mom say, okay, I'm going to go look in the couch. Right? It wouldn't make sense. I just looked there. I told her it's not there. But this is Solomon's story. Solomon is trying to help us out because he searched pleasure. He searched money. He searched satisfaction. He searched success. He searched doing whatever you want and having whatever you want. And he's saying the true life, the life that you are looking for, is not found in those things. The life that we want, the life that our heart truly desires, is not found in those things. They're not found in the things of the world. He searched them, he conquered them, he had them all, and he's trying to tell us, don't look there. Don't look in the couch. It's not in the couch. I looked there. Don't waste your time. We won't find purpose and meaning if we're only pursuing the things of the world, because we're not created to be pleased or content by the things of the world. We were created to be pleased and content through a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's where life is. That's where our life is, nowhere other than Jesus. Solomon climbed the mountain, and now he's telling us that it's not worth it. He's urging us not to follow in his footsteps, but the question is, are we going to listen to him? Are we going to take his advice? Ultimately, what he's telling us is that living a life apart from God is meaningless. The American dream that most of us probably want is meaningless without Jesus. Life without Jesus is meaningless. Solomon gained the world, but in the process, he lost God. He traded his pursuit of God for the pursuit of the world, and he tells us that this was the biggest mistake that he could have ever made. Having money and being successful, being popular, all these things, they're not bad in and of itself, but when these things become the main thing, the one thing that we're pursuing and longing for, that's when we get in trouble. One of my favorite verses is John 10:10. It says, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." This is Jesus talking. He's saying that he came to give us life and give it to us abundantly, give it to us in the fullest way that we can. But why does it seem like so few people truly find this kind of life? It's because we're looking in the wrong places. Satan has convinced us and tricked us that the kind of life that we want is found in the things we own, the experiences that we have, the places that we go. When the truth is that Jesus is saying it's found in him. Pursue me, come after me, find me, and you will find the life that you're looking for. Everything that we are looking for, everything that we long for is found in Jesus Christ, and only in Jesus. You want to know the fun and scary part about being in high school? It's that you get to decide what you do with your life. You're at the point where you're making your own decisions. You get to decide how you spend your time. You get to decide who you hang out with. You get to decide how you spend your money. You get to decide what you're going to spend your life chasing after. This leads us to our bottom line for tonight, and it's the thing that I want us to all understand and take away. It's that God needs to be the number one pursuit of our life. Because true contentment, true fulfillment, true life is only found when we're pursuing God. And I urge you to make the choice tonight. Make it right now that you will be a person that is radically chasing after Jesus Christ. Be a person that's all in the pursuit to know God more, to know what he has for you, and to know who he created you to be. Be all in. I firmly believe that this is the only way to have true life. True joy, true contentment, true fulfillment. It's the only way to get to the end of our life and not have regrets about how we spend it, is if we're chasing Jesus Christ above anything else. But what does this practically look like for us? It's nothing new. This isn't anything that you've never heard before. I know you guys have heard this all plenty of times before, but if we want to pursue Jesus, then we have to discipline ourselves and we have to make it a priority. It's not just going to naturally happen. So here are what I believe are the four major areas that we have to actively be living out if we want to pursue Jesus. We have to be reading our Bible, we have to be praying, we have to be living in community, and we have to be serving. And my question is, the question I want us to consider is, what steps do you need to take to pursue God wholeheartedly? When you think about this list, and when it comes to pursuing God and having a relationship with him, are you able to identify an area and say, yeah, I'm lacking in that area? I really could take this a step further. I need to grow in this area. Tonight in your small groups, you're going to have time of reflection to really answer this question. You're going to get a note card, and on one side, you're going to write down an area that you feel like you're lacking in or that you need to grow in. On the other side of that note card, you're going to come up with some kind of plan. Right? Because it's one thing to say I'm lacking in this area, but it's a whole other thing to say, here's how I'm going to go about it. So we're going to identify the area that we're lacking in, and then we're going to come up with some sort of game plan, something that we're going to do, how we're going to practically apply this so that we can put it into action and grow in this area. And this is crucial for us because we know that God needs to be the number one pursuit of our life, because that's where life is found.